Okay, we're here to talk about Disclaimer, Episode 6 on Apple TV Plus, originally aired Friday, November 1st. Again, this episode, as all others, written and directed by Alfonso Cuarón, and Disclaimer is taken from 2015 Renee Knight novel of the same name. In Episode 6, we see Nicholas recovering in the hospital from his drug overdose. Stephen tries to sneak in a syringe of cleaning chemicals to kill him, trying to further ruin Catherine's life. While there, Catherine sees him, attacks him, and everyone in the hospital thinks it's Catherine is the one who is losing control. Robert, unaware of what's happened, apologizes to Stephen for what Catherine did and invites him to come back and visit Nicholas again. In the past, we learned that Sasha did not leave Italy because of a aunt passing away, but because of a fight between her and Jonathan. Catherine's version of the past begins to tell a different story than in the Perfect Stranger book. She recalls Jonathan watching them, taking photos of them, but she did not interact with him at all. At the end of the episode, after multiple attempts to try and talk to Stephen, Catherine breaks into his house so that she can tell her version of the truth. As they sit down over tea, Stephen fills hers with sleeping pills. Catherine drinks the tea and says it is time for her voice to be heard. So we are starting in this penultimate episode to get some sense of what we expected, which is there's a different version of the truth out there, at least Catherine's version of the truth. We're getting some glimpses of that now. So why don't we start there and say, okay, how far have we deviated from the book? It seems like it's quite far for what little we know so far.
You mean from the book within the story?
Yeah, the book
Yeah.
within the story. Yeah, The Perfect Stranger.
Yeah. So, I mean, the version that we start seeing in this episode, which I think it becomes like retroactively clear as Catherine's version, right?
Yes.
Um, is wildly different from the version that we saw that was representing the book. So, clearly, we're on the right track about that. What we saw before was what is in the book that Nancy wrote, The Perfect Stranger. Um, I definitely enjoyed this episode more than episode five, personally. It was nice to be back to the multiple timelines. It felt much more like the show we had been watching through the first four episodes. And yeah, I mean, that's the big question I found myself thinking about as we come out of this episode is, we're going to get Catherine's version, or at least some of it. How much of it are we going to get? Because you mentioned you put sleeping pills in her tea,
Yeah, yeah.
and she already took a sip. So, like,
Yeah. I
is she
mean,
going to pass
it's
out
not
before
like
she finishes?
it's not like he like is gave her, I mean, something that's gonna kill her or something. I mean, it's just she might get drowsy. I don't know what he's expecting, but
I don't think it's gonna kill her. I think I mean it might be possible. They kind of make a point of having the nurse or whatever say, "Don't take more than one of these
right,
pills," and
right.
he's like crushing up two or three of them.
Yeah.
Um, she takes a sip of the tea. Oh, don't drink the tea. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Why are you taking tea?
Yeah.
English people
Never,
and their tea.
never.
Um, But this is the big thing I'm curious about. So we're clearly getting Catherine's version, or at least some of it. And I'm just noting, I think there is an opening for the possibility that it gets cut off and we don't get the whole thing if she does
Yeah.
like pass out from the sleeping pills. But then are we going to ultimately get the truth, as it were? Is the show going to give us a representation of events that's not from a perspective?
Yes,
And
this is my big question. I'm glad you mentioned that because we've clearly got at least the story up to this point from The Perfect Stranger, the book, the narrative that Nancy wrote based on what limited information she has. Now we're starting to see and hear Catherine's version of the truth based on what she is saying she is going to tell Stephen, at least from these limited flashbacks that we get. But then there are either of those versions actually the truth? I mean, Catherine's sort of speaking as the voice of all of us who's sort of been thinking this, there's got to be another version here. Tell us what it is. But those, so I guess it should save some space for her to give her version and tell what happened and then see sort of what my questions still are because, I mean, hey, those photos exist. There's no denying that. Something has happened.
Mhm.
Jonathan got them somehow. So what if she did not go down a road that leads to them being together. I'm curious sort of how that happened. So I'm very curious. Yeah, will there end up being three perspectives here? I don't think so. I think we get the Catherine version and the Nancy version.
and
But
that's it.
I'm open to being wrong about that.
Well, I mean, I think it certainly could go that way, and that could be interesting and compelling in its own right. That we might be left with kind of two versions of events, and to decide for ourselves what we trust. Um,
Yeah.
of course, rationally, there'd be some grounds for trusting Catherine's version a little bit more than the version of events written by someone who wasn't there. But of course, there's also a motivation for Catherine to tell the story in a way that makes her look as good as possible, and we have worries about that. Yeah, so
Yeah.
but I'm really, really, really curious to see what happens in the finale along these lines. I presume it's going to pick up with them sitting there in the kitchen. It's going to pick up with Catherine's version of what happened in Italy with the
Yeah.
sleeping pills, though. Again, how much of it do we get? Does she have the chance to tell the whole story? Um, and then also this question of whether we get um, a version that is like objective reality, which
Yeah.
could happen. I could see it happening, and I could see this going in various ways in terms of structure of the finale.
Yeah, I don't. I agree with you. I don't want to close the door on any of that and sort of how they tell this story. Um, I, I think that from Catherine's perspective, I think we'll find out there's something. There was actually an affair. There was some, time that they spent together, or some intimate time that they spent together. I think that she's not concerned about. Like that aspect of it is gone. She can't go back and change that. That part of her marriage may be damaged forever. However, she's at the point where I've got to at least try to save this, maybe even reputationally, this idea that I had something to do with someone's death. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, I cheated on my husband. It's another to say,
Well,
I was complicit in someone dying.
and beyond that, I think that she intuits what Stephen is up to.
Yeah.
I mean, um, I found it at least a little bit surprising when it became clear that his plan was to kill Nicholas.
Yeah.
But that becomes clear
Let's be
here.
clear. Catherine is not the worst person in this story right now. That's
Yeah, we
clearly
were
Stephen.
we were grappling with that question last week, and I think, oh,
Yeah.
okay, definitely Stephen is off the deep end, as you put in our notes. He's bad. He is the worst person insofar as he is looking to kill this young man Nicholas, who has he didn't do anything wrong, you know. And it also sounds like from the voiceover that Stephen intends to later kill Catherine.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
sounds
I
like,
think so.
right?
I think so. Yeah.
So
He's just a straight eye for an eye, motivation right now. I mean, he can't see beyond that.
yeah, but it's even beyond that. It's even beyond. It's not. You know, it's the thing. Eye for an eye. Part of that involves a notion of proportionality. You know,
Right.
this
Yeah.
is like what John Wick does is not eye for an eye. It's like
Right.
it's going overboard, man. Um, Even if we're on John Wick's side too. Yeah, whatever, if we're referencing that film. But Steven, no, not really on Steven's side, and this is definitely petty vengeance, and he doesn't really know what happened. But anyway, what the point I was trying to make is I feel like with him visiting in the hospital, Catherine may not know that Stephen has the intention of killing Nicholas, right? But I think she senses it, and someone else might, like Robert, would say, "Oh, you're being paranoid. What's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
But she's not. She's right. So in terms of what leads her to break into his house, I think it is beyond what you were saying. I mean, there is that level of her reputation and career and life, but I think she
Yeah.
senses that Stephen is a threat to go as far as we know he intends to go.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I think that she feels if she doesn't act, Stephen is going to act, and he's going to take this to some extreme that, I think to your point, she can tell he has nothing left to live for. So he will do whatever it takes to destroy her, even at the cost of, you know, his own life or going to jail, whatever it is, right? I think that she clearly sees that as God. It feels like I have to take these steps of breaking into his house to intervene.
Of course, if all that's right, why are you drinking the damn tea? Don't drink the tea.
Exactly.
I'm Catherine. I just can't help it. I'm British. It's a tea. You can't resist. Um, yeah, so we'll see how that goes. Um, let's one other thing we mentioned that I feel like we're jumping around now, but not sure where to go next. But it's interesting insofar as so there's three timelines, as it were. One is clearly Catherine's version of what happened in Italy,
Yeah.
but the other one that's not the present is again with the younger versions of Stephen and Nancy in the time period when they're returning from Italy after
Yeah.
Jonathan has died. And Stephen letting us know about how, Nancy took some liberties with the text. And
Yes. Yeah.
we're not told exactly why Sasha came back to London, but we are told definitively it's not because her aunt died or whatever it was. Um, she and Jonathan had some kind of fight.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some
It's
kind of disagreement that happened. Yeah. Not clear necessarily, but it's not the pure motive that Nancy laid it out to be in the book, certainly.
no, and it seems from what we see pretty bad. I mean,
Yeah.
we're given Stephen's perspective, and I'm not sure Stephen even knows
Yeah.
as much as Nancy knew. So I don't know that we're ever going to really find out. But it's worth thinking about the question a little bit because if you think about those scenes where Nancy's on the phone with Sasha's mother,
Yeah.
it definitely seems to me like Sasha's mother is accusing Jonathan of having done something heinous.
So
Not just like
yeah,
they
this
had
is
a
another thing I'm glad we're bringing up because to me, I see something like that, which is let's go back and retell or at least reimagine why Sasha left. And it makes me think, okay, well, then that Sasha Jonathan story has then something to do with what happens then later with Jonathan and Catherine. Clearly she left, but why does that matter? You know, the reasons why she left Italy, if that doesn't then factor into what happens after that point, right? Um, and maybe I'm wrong, but it's like, does that matter to the story? If is it just trying to paint Jonathan in a better light? If it's just he just stays there after his girlfriend had to leave because
Mhm.
of the death, something like that.
Well, I definitely think it paints him in a worse light with what we see now, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yep.
impugning his character to some degree. Um, what did he do? I was trying to think about this and I was struggling to even speculate about what would be at the level of making Sasha's mother as upset as she seems to be,
Yeah.
because then she's making Nancy so upset she like breaks the telephone.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, is it just like I don't approve of my daughter dating your son, that type of thing, or is this like he is doing things to her that we just cannot stand for?
he beat her up. Did she come home with some black eyes? I
Exactly.
mean, like,
Exactly.
what else could it be other than like if he assaulted her?
Yeah.
Um, that's the only kind of thing that comes to mind for me that would be at the level of sparking the apparent anger, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean,
Can I
it
give
also
you?
kind of feels like when Nancy calls to say, "Hey, Jonathan's dead," the response she's getting is, "Who cares?" or like, "I'm glad," or something like this, and then they never hear from them again.
Can I give you a theory?
Yeah.
Okay, so my theory, and this goes back to this may have been episode 3 when the parents go to Italy to see Jonathan's body. I can't been able to get this out of my head, and maybe there's another explanation that I'm not remembering, but they notice some kind of scar wound on his arm, and they say, "What's that from?"
Oh
They say,
yeah.
"Oh, it must have been from the accident." So I do wonder if Jonathan is someone who Sasha didn't do something he wanted, didn't give him what he wanted, goes down this path we were just talking about, beats her up, whatever. They get into this fight. She leaves. Um, Catherine is making eyes at him on the beach. Whatever, something happens. She, in the end, somehow doesn't give him something that he wants. there's a fight, there's something aggressive. Catherine fights back, wounds him somehow. Something then happens again with their son. So this is much, much, much more pointed towards Jonathan being the instigator, the aggravator here, as opposed to, the savior, which we're led to believe through the course of the book. I have no idea, but is he sort of a someone that's causing these things to happen?
Yeah, a good callback to the wound, because I think it would be. I almost feel like the show owes us an explanation of that.
Yeah, and
Uh,
maybe it's just from getting rescued, but they haven't explained that.
yeah, I mean that's the explanation they already gave. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, oh, something happened during the accident, Um, so yeah, I wonder what we'll find out.
yeah.
I
I'm
mean,
very,
it could
very
all,
you're raising the best point, which is will we get the true perspective as opposed to the two polarizing perspectives?
yeah, and part of me really feels like we will, and that the series will end that way.
Yeah, yeah,
That's just my hunch.
yeah.
I could be wrong. Could be coming back next week, being disappointed, and being like, what's up? What about Jonathan's wound? They never told us anything. What it's like
Exactly.
Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Um,
Santa Claus in Baltimore. Oh yes, that'll hit home for
uh,
them.
yeah, so just call back to our Lady in the Lake coverage. Um, what else was I going to say? Yeah, so okay, I was thinking about though, do we find out exactly what happened between him and Sasha? Maybe. And I kind of hope so. And maybe the wound you're mentioning relates to that. But maybe we don't. To your question, well, like, okay, why is this here? I think it does at least get me thinking further along the lines of, well, maybe Jonathan is a bad guy. And so going back to the theory I floated a couple weeks ago that maybe Jonathan is actually the reason that Nicholas ends up out in the middle of the sea. Like maybe he put him out there.
Yep,
What we saw before was the version of events in the book. So maybe, look, various things about this could be false.
yep,
Like Jonathan being on the beach when Nicholas is out there. So here's a possibility.
exactly.
Catherine does fall asleep on the beach. She's taking a nap. While she's asleep, Jonathan comes and encourages her kid out into the water and pushes that rowboat all the way out past the waves, out into the middle of the sea.
Yeah,
And then Jonathan can't get back, and that's why he died.
yeah. I almost think, now that we're talking about it almost seems almost too neat to do it that way, right? It's like this whole time
Mm.
we've been painting this person as this awful, awful woman who deserved what she got at the end of this book. It's just the heel turn is, oh, actually it was Jonathan all along. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah. I mean, it's sort of a standard trope there. It's like
I
we can see that happening. Maybe, hopefully, it's a little bit more. Hopefully, there's some more complexity to it. But yeah, I can see us having written the script already before we watched it.
Yeah, I mean, like, okay, yeah, I'm with you. I hope the show does better than that
Yeah,
because that does almost feel a little bit too, I don't know, stock ending kind
yeah,
of thing. It's like
yeah, yeah.
it's a twist that you see coming. Uh, one of those things where, like, if they tell you there's a twist in the story, like, oh, it's obviously going to be this.
Yeah.
But there are other possibilities, and that's the big one I keep thinking about is one of the things I do find most interesting about the show is its structure and this idea that we're getting events from someone's perspective. And so, yeah, that remains my biggest question is whether we will get the
Yeah.
truth per se, or whether it's always going to be from one perspective or another. I feel like we could only get some of these answers about Jonathan if we do get that kind of, you know, omniscient narrator perspective. So we'll see.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. And I just checked. The finale is 57 minutes long, so it's got some meat to it that we could hopefully spend some time exploring that. So we'll see what we get.
Yeah. Yeah, these have varied a little bit. Some have been 55, 57 minutes, some of them are like 45. That's fine. Let's see. Anything else we need to hit on here? Anything in our
Yeah, I mean,
notes?
I thought this was a good episode, like as you say, going back to the timelines, getting us pointed in the direction of where we thought we would go, which is the perspective of what Catherine experienced. Good episode. Hopefully, it sets up something that will happen that's great in the finale. But yeah, I mean, pretty clear two timeline, we're starting to see what we hope to see. I guess Steven was the biggest surprise for me. The man, yeah, this guy has just lost it.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, well, clearly he's trying to wreck her life, but he's
Yeah,
gone this far. He was going to kill the
exactly.
kid. There's a question, another question. Like, so if Catherine does fall unconscious from the sleeping pills, what's Stephen going to do? Because she has wrecked his plan at very least, insofar as he's told us his plan was to kill Nicholas, make Catherine deal with that loss of a child for however long,
Yeah.
and then kill her. She's messed that up,
Yeah, yeah. Unless it's
right?
just she's going to sleep for a whole day and he's going to spend tomorrow going back to the hospital and trying to do it again. But yeah, that doesn't seem to be like the direction that this would take.
Well, and what if you're Steven and you give her the sleeping pills and she does fall unconscious, what do you do with her then? How do you
Yeah, exactly.
proceed? You
Yeah, you got a
know?
problem on your hand if you got a, yeah, unless you're just going to
So
get
I mean
rid
I
of her
feel like that's
somehow.
kind of what they've set us up for, right? That at the beginning of the next episode we'll get Catherine's version, maybe all of it, maybe some of it. She's already drinking the tea, so probably she will succumb to the sleeping pills. Then we'll be in the present timeline with that question of, well, what Steven does and how he proceeds. So that's my expectation. Who knows? They could structure the episode differently, and I just hope that it's good to close this one
So
out.
all I can say is I'm looking forward to watching the finale. I'm looking forward to seeing, I mean, I'm prepared to be disappointed, but I'm looking forward to see what they do.
Same. Yeah, I am. Which is good because after last week, we were both on the same page, being like, oh, a little
Yeah.
unsure about where the series is going. And I feel like, all right, now we're back with episode 6.
Yes, sir.
Looking forward to seeing how it ends. So, yeah, we'll be back next week talking about the finale of Disclaimer, episode 7. We should get that out on Friday next week, I believe. In the meantime, check out tvobsessive.com. Lots of stuff that you can read there. You can follow the site on social media, search for TV Obsessive. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do leave a good rating, review, and so on and so forth. If you're on YouTube listening to this disclaimer part, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and see you next week.
All right. Looking forward to talking finale with you next week.